Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Clionadh Introduction, and I'm the founder and CEO of ACLED, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. And we are a conflict monitor and a leading source of data and analysis on global conflict. I will be moderating today's session where we will be discussing our latest report, which is the New Front Lines, How Jihadist Expansion is Reshaping the Benin, Niger, and Nigerian Borderlands. Since early 2024, the violent campaigns of the Al-Qaeda-affiliated Jamaat al-Nusrat al-Islam wa Muslimin and the Islamic State Sahel province, jihadist groups, have been reshaping the security landscape in the Sahel and its littoral borderlands. These groups have significantly expanded their operations, transforming the regions bordering the Sahel towards the coast into an active conflict hotspot. This report explores JNIM and ISSP's new phase of expansion and their growing influence in the border regions between Niger, Nigeria, and specifically Benin. Our monitoring shows that this is really part of a much broader regional trend of jihadist expansion and is consequently leading to larger proportions of the civilian population being exposed to conflict. I would like to note that ACLED data on Benin are provided by a consortium led by the Clionadh Institute. We're very grateful to be working with the Clionadh Institute and our close partnerships, especially on the coastal West African states. We are joined today by the report's author, Henny Nsiba, from ACLED Senior Analyst for West Africa. Henny, of course, leads our conflict data collection and monitoring and analysis for the Sahel. He is also the director of MENA Stream, a research and risk consultancy that provides intelligence analysis and tailored services. His expertise centers around insurgencies and their various dimensions and non-state actors in Sahelian countries. And he will walk us through his excellent presentation shortly. And we're, of course, always very grateful for Henny's work. We also have the pleasure of hosting Dr. John Sunday Ojo. Dr. Ojo is a postdoctoral research fellow focusing on intelligence in the Global South at the Institute for Security and Global Affairs at Leiden University in the Netherlands. His research primarily focuses on the political economy of armed conflict, concentrating on non-state armed groups, intelligence gathering strategies, recruitment, and radicalization. So incredibly important for what we're talking about today. His research encompasses both jihadist and non-jihadist armed groups operating across the Sahel Belt and the Lake Chad region. His research also includes counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations, the geopolitics of foreign military bases, and how such engagements impact African security governance. So quite a wide range, and we're very grateful to have them both here. After the presentation from Henny and the remarks from John, you will have the opportunity to ask questions during a live Q&A at the end of the session. So please feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A function in this event. And of course, please know that you're more than welcome to refer to or engage with the report itself, which we've released. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Henny to start us off. Thank you very much, Henny.
Well, thank you very much, Clionadh, and welcome everyone. And thank you for taking the time and joining us today for this webinar. Also, I want to give a special thanks to everyone at ACLED for contributing to this report and organizing today's event. I also want to thank our Benin data partner, Clionadh Institute, for which I also conducted research that has fed into this report. And this report delves into the escalation of violence in the borderlands between Benin, Niger, and Nigeria, which has taken on new proportions and characteristics since early 2024 in several border regions, including the Alibori department of Benin, Dosso and Tawa regions in Niger, and Sokoto and Kebbi states in Nigeria, where the ongoing violence really marks a new phase of jihadist expansion by the Al-Qaeda-affiliated Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, or JNIM, and Islamic State Sahel province. And as you can see on the attached graph, violence has become more pronounced since early 2024 due to the parallel efforts of these two groups that is engaging in sustained violent campaigns in this sub-region. And we can move on to the next slide. So both JNIM and ISSP have expanded their influence and reshaped the security landscape in the sub-region through repeated attacks on security force positions, engagement in armed confrontations with the military, and attacks on civilians. And by consequence, increasing the civilian exposure to conflict. And regarding civilian exposure, I want to provide a little retrospect to our previous webinar by raising a data point, since we in the previous one highlighted the conflict exposure in a comparative manner between JNIM and ISSP. And in the case of ISSP, by 2023, over 8,000 towns and villages were affected by ISSP activities. And in the case of JNIM, that number was over 27,000. And an important aspect to address in this particular context is that media narratives attribute this surge in violence to a new terrorist group monikered the Lakurawa. But in reality, these attacks are more long-standing ISSP operations that we at ACLED have monitored for years, including movements from Mali's northeastern Manaka region, Tilaberi and Tawa, and across the hinterland of the Doso region into northwestern Nigeria's Sokoto and Kebbi states. But also, these media narratives can perceive groups operating differently than usual, but this often comes down to the fact that these groups employ hybrid tactics that mix self-defense, insurgency, and banditry and adapt to changing circumstances when they infiltrate, contest, and consolidate territory. And I think this has been a quite pronounced aspect in the case of ISSP, because their presence in northwestern Nigeria doesn't date since yesterday, but rather since at least 2018, when the group began to infiltrate this area. And we can move on to the next slide. And one aspect of this report is JNIM and ISSP in comparison, because these are parallel efforts, as you can see on the map, where both groups are using their traditional strongholds as staging grounds for the expansion into these littoral borderlands. And you can see hexagons in light blue and dark blue, which represents JNIM, and the purple, light purple, and dark purple representing ISSP. And these hexagon areas are accompanied by arrows that shows the movements of respective group, which are using very different geographic trajectories or pathways to enter this sub-region. And in the case of JNIM, you can see that from eastern Burkina Faso, which the group is using as staging ground, there are multiple arrows going into the Savans region of Togo, Atakora department in Benin, but also in a specific area, which is the arrow basically in the middle, that where the group from Kompienga and Kapua provinces is carrying out incursions into Park W, or the wider WAP complex, which is a natural reserve, but also one of the largest sort of biospheres in West Africa, with very rich fauna and like a natural reserve. In any case, as I said, JNIM has utilized eastern Burkina Faso and southwestern Niger as staging areas, and has since early 2024 really consolidated its presence in northern Benin, and also entrenched itself in this larger natural reserve. But what is really pronounced since early 2024 is that JNIM's expansion is a more deliberate and strategic expansion, which is manifested through the group's use of media and propaganda to really broadcast its presence. So it has claimed a string of attacks in Benin and also in Niger and Togo. And when you look at this media campaign, you kind of understand that it is really a much more strategic and deliberate expansion into this area. That also differentiates itself a little bit from the more slower approach that it used in the previous years, which began already in 2021 in Benin and in 2022 in Togo. And we can move to the next slide. So in the case of ISSP, that group operates from the northeastern parts of Mali and Niger's Tillabéri and Tawa regions, but has also intensified activities across the Dosso region. As I already mentioned, ISSP has operated in Dosso region and also in northwestern Nigeria since 2018, but is the same as in the case of JNIM. Since early 2024, it has really intensified its operations in these areas, marked by targeting of the Benin-Niger pipeline, and the group has conducted about a dozen sabotage attacks against this pipeline, but also established sort of transit hubs in several localities, including in the south of Tawa, but also in the Dosso region. And ISSP's initial operations, and this was also highlighted in the previous webinar, that the group used the Dosso region, but also northwestern Nigeria as a form of support zone, engaging in non-violent activities such as extortion, tax collection, managing supply lines, but has now escalated attacks on military and critical infrastructure since early 2024. But the difference between JNIM and ISSP in this regard is the very different approaches adopted, because JNIM has utilized a much more overt approach by claiming responsibility for attacks, broadcasting, its presence in propaganda, while ISSP has used a much more covert approach, or even clandestine, you can say, by leveraging the entrenchment it has achieved in northwestern Nigeria, but also to entrench itself in the border regions between Niger and Niger. And we can move on to the next slide. So what is interesting in this regard, it is a new expansion phase. At the same time, it follows several phases of expansion earlier, but now we also see that there is an emerging overlap, especially in the Gaia commune, which is located on the Benin and Niger border. And I would say that this overlap also creates a quite complex and volatile situation, because both groups, they use very different tactics. JNIM has been more focused on targeting security force positions and also enmesh themselves or embed themselves with the local communities. And I think the presence of both groups and this competition really kind of sets the stage for more intensified competition, but also potential confrontation as observed in other areas in the region. And we can move on to the next slide. And as also mentioned, JNIM has really focused on community integration through preaching and sermons and community outreach, but also involvement in the local economies and illicit trade. And this particular region harbors many different smuggling routes and trade routes, including for fuel, supplies, motorcycles, and other commodities that are useful or essential even for these groups' operations. And as an example, I would mention the commune of Karimama in Benin's Alibori department, where JNIM fighters, for instance, regularly participate in Friday prayers, which, along with other interactions with the population and engagement with the local economy, are really indicative of how the group seeks to embed itself among communities. And we can move on to the last slide. And in contrast, ISSP employs very aggressive tactics, including economic warfare through the repeated sabotage attacks targeting the Benin-Niger pipeline, and has recently escalated attacks on civilians. And if you look at the map, you see a cluster of red dots concentrated to the Gaia and Diongio communes. And in February 2020, on the 22nd of February, the group conducted its first massacre in this area by killing 14 people, burning houses, and injuring other people, while also seizing livestock in several villages. And I think that illustrates tactics used elsewhere by the group, and also, again, enforces the observation of the growing conflict exposure targeting, the civilian populations in this border region. And with that, I'm wrapping up and opening up for questions.
Thanks so much, Henny. That was really thorough and wonderful. A great summary of the details in that report. I'd love now to turn to Dr. Ojo for a response, and then we can open up to questions. Thank you.
My presentation will be based on the case of Lakurawa, especially around Nigeria and the Niger border in Africa. This presentation is based on my field work that was carried out in Gudu, Tangaza, and the Binchi local government areas of Sokoto State. That these are the border communities that the border communities that share borders with the Republic of Niger, and we use 3 local governments where the Lakurawas have been residing since they were discovered. One important thing that I think we need to analyze is how this group emerged. There were conflicting timing about the arrival of Lakurawa in this area. Some believe that Lakurawa, they have been in existence before 2016. Some agreed that they discovered them in 2017, and some said in 2019. But regardless of the timing and uncertainty revolving around the arrival of Lakurawa, there are some basic and fundamental issues that emerged regarding the arrival of Lakurawa and the operational dynamics of the terrorist group. Firstly, we observe that all their commanders are Black Arabs. They all speak Arabic language, speak French, Fulfulde, as well as Barbara, a language spoken in some part of Mali. And Lakurawa they have been attacking communities since 2016, according to respondents in these communities. But in most cases, they are misconstrued as armed bandits because the inability of the community to differentiate between this jihadist group and the armed bandits that is operating currently in the northwest Nigeria. Lakurawa, at times, they employed a kind of economic incentive, primarily to build trust among the local population. Their primary aim is to promote a kind of distorted Islamism and establish a Sharia code system similar to several other jihadist entities in Sahel region. The Lakurawa group, according to respondents, are considered to be part of a broader jihadist entities operating in the Sahelian belt, including JNIM and Islamic State affiliates. Since 2019, they have been increasing in numbers and have been carrying out their activities, especially when it comes to preaching, attacks on residents and military assets, enforcing Sharia laws and collecting zakat and arms. as well as a kind of a supervision of mosque and local Arabic schools. But one fundamental issue that I think we need to consider is that how do people in these border communities perceive the arrival of Lakurawa? Some believe that when they first came, there were no signs of terrorist activities with them. They were not seen with arms. There were not many, and they were not threatening anybody. And they were just staying in the bush along the border. People thought they were just people from the jail who just resided to stay there for some time and then go back. And if we look at this scenario, when it comes to the case of Lakurawa and the border communities, one issue that I discovered is this, that this terrorist group, they use pastoralism as a form of strategy, to promote their agenda, because and also it's also considered as a kind of surveillance strategy, because these border communities, they practice a kind of pastoralism whereby when they see some other people from other countries like Mali, Niger, operating the same occupational system, they used to accommodate them. So initially, they were not displaying a kind of terrorist trait when they first arrived in these border communities. Moreover, I would like to also look at how important is religion and or ideology in Lakurawa's recruitment strategies. Looking at the way they have been operating in this border community, it is the first thing that I identify is the issue of they used to enforce a kind of a distorted Islamic doctrine, like beating people who drink or smoke marijuana, warning people against listening to music or copying Western culture, a kind of trait that's similar to that of Boko Haram and other jihadist groups in the Sahel region. So when it comes to recruitment, Lakurawa has recently capitalized on economic vulnerabilities of the people in these communities, and they mostly target young people and also those that speak Fufude, a kind of a language spoken in northwestern Nigeria and some African or some Sahelian states. So these are the people that I used to refer to as Fulani. They are the ones speaking Fufude in that part of the communities. So they concentrate in recruiting from this particular group of people in this region. So I would like to talk about the strategies that they use for the expansionist agenda. Firstly, they disguise as pastoralists, and the pastoralist occupation is instrumentalized to mask its intended agenda. This group used pastoralism to penetrate the border communities along the Niger-Nigerian borders, and also they leverage Islamic religious affinity and preaching. And therefore, they also utilize the vulnerability of ungoverned spaces, and including providing support to poor people in the region, and also changing names and presenting themselves as a savior, especially against the armed bandits that have been operating in the northwestern Nigeria for some years back. So I think we need to look at what are the factors driving its success, especially for expansionist agenda. One of those factors can be considered as intelligence failure and lack of cooperation among cross-border security agencies. As part of my field work, a respondent argued that a security officer argues that we have no cooperation among us when it comes to intelligence. Some of the agencies hold intelligence and there is no effective central coordinating agency for that purpose. Intelligence is likely fragmented and unnecessarily compartmentalized. And also the issue of a military coup that dismantles security cooperation in the Sahel region can also be considered, and the community reliance on informal security rather than the state. And we also consider the issue of unmanned, ungoverned spaces in the area. Conclusively, I would like to establish that the jihadist group promoting the expansionist agenda in Nigeria and Niger borders to Benin are part of the parent jihadist terror groups in the Sahel region. Regardless of the names, their ideologies remain the same. From this ideological similarity perspective, changing name is part of the strategies to obscure the state and the security agency about their affiliation and real identity. And moreover, the non-violent arrivals of Lakurawa are instrumentalized as surveillance assets for bigger future operation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate that. So we're going to turn now to the questions, but before we do, I had a question that it turned out that one of the anonymous people in the Q&As had, and it was about a point where you two seem to be potentially at odds with each other. So I'd love to have both of your perspectives on this, which is, Henny, you've noted both in the report and in your presentation that the narrative about Lakurawa is mistaking attributing the surge, of course, to violence in the northwestern Nigeria to Lakurawa, but that those attacks are in fact long-standing and kind of reconstituted ISSP operations. But John, you seem to be saying that Lakurawa is in fact a new group and not affiliated with the ISSP. And I'm interested in where you both see the attribution and to what extent we can assume that they are or not affiliated. So Henny, would you like to start and John reply?
Absolutely. I mean, to begin with, the crisis group, they came out with a report in 2021 that really contextualized the expansion and activities of ISSP in these areas, like in the southwest of Niger, but also in the border areas of Nigeria. We at ACLED, we have, I would say, meticulously observed and monitored the activities of ISSP in these regions with our own data. And I mean, we have been able to identify them as ISSP. And also in conversations with local people in Niger that mentioned this first time around 2017, 2018, and described the process of the group starting to recruit people in northwestern Nigeria, but also being invited, to provide support or defend against bandits and so forth. Some things that have come up in this broader conversation more recently. But I mean, for me, there is really no ambiguity with regard to the identity of the group, but there is some different developments over time that has taken place. For instance, in 2019, ISSP was then the Greatest Sahara faction of the Islamic State West Africa province, or ISWAP. So there was a level of coordination at the time, at least that we were informed about. That is not what we see today as pronounced, at least. It's more like ISSP is the sponsor, but also that they have mid-level commanders that have been dispatched from northeastern Mali all the way down to southwest Niger and northwestern Nigeria. So, I mean, these anecdotal sort of evidence pretty much confirm, I would say, my analysis.
Thanks so much, Henny. John?
Thank you. I would like to establish something when it comes to Lakurawa's identity and their affiliation. The security agencies and the community that that I interview, they believe that these people are the same JNIM and a fragment of Islamic affiliates. So looking at their ideology, I think this jihadist group in the Sahelian belt shared similar ideological orientation. So I think it's a bit tricky to really pinpoint which particular group they belong, because at times all these border communities might not even understood which group belongs to one particular jihadist group. So it's a bit difficult, but what I discover based on my field work, I think they are part of the same JNIM and Islamic State affiliate in the Sahelian belt.
Thanks, John. That's also really interesting. One of the things that I find really fascinating about the Sahel is that it represents a pretty extreme version of what we're seeing in other conflict environments, which is that groups emerge in order to be co-opted. So they are effectively starting out to see who would take them under their wing to start larger networks or larger alliance structures. And that even though there's been a tremendous surge in the violence across the Sahel now for almost beyond 10 years, there's still room for new groups to emerge, says something about the kind of violence market that has emerged within the littoral states more broadly. Of course, it's expanded into those areas, but also just in the Sahel generally, that there are opportunities, or groups see opportunities and incentives to start an armed group movement in order to be part of these much larger structures that are being built on the violence. And with that, I appreciate both of your takes on that. Kiran has asked, what do you think the short-term and the long-term future of the region is, given these patterns that we've discussed today? Henny, would you like to start?
Yes, absolutely. So I think speaking even about short and mid and long term is very difficult, because what we've seen is a very protracted conflict that has been ongoing for more than a decade and show really no signs of abating. Rather the opposite, it is escalating. I think the case of Burkina Faso is pretty illustrative in this regard, where the violence has taken on, I would say, civil war-like proportions. And these groups will also try or attempt to take ground, territory, and to continue expand into areas which they find susceptible or where the conditions are conducive to their operations. And we have seen attempts in Ivory Coast, it didn't succeed. But in this case that we have highlighted in this report, we can see that the violence is really sustained in a manner that shows that they are achieving some form of success to be able to kind of infiltrate and now beginning to contest territory. If they will be successful in consolidating these areas, that's still to be seen. But I think they are progressing.
Can I jump in here very quickly and push Henny just a tiny bit? Henny, do you think that they're going to try to take out any of the governments themselves?
No, that I don't think.
Okay.
I don't think they have the capacity, even though, I mean, they have prosaic goals in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger about, taking capitals and try to establish, proto-Islamic states or similar. But I mean, at present, I think they have limited capacity to achieve such goals.
And in that capacity, is their desire now more economically orientated, like you've seen over the last 2 years, so that it becomes like a cartel situation? Or is it about creating a parallel proto-state that is ideologically based, such as John has suggested?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the case for both groups, even though they use different methodologies to, you know, to reach those goals, or at least attempt to do that.
Thank you very much. Sorry about bumping in there, John. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm emphasizing that there could be a kind of a power consolidation in the region in the nearest future, because based on the intelligence report from the community in these areas, it seems like the Lakurawas, they are planning a kind of collaboration with armed bandits and other jihadist group operating along the Sahelian belts in order to wage a kind of a full war against the Nigerian states and other neighboring states in the region. So I'm emphasizing something like that in the nearest future in that region.
Thanks very much. There's certainly, lots to pick from in the northwest of Nigeria. So it again seems like a growth strategy to focus on recruitment. And as Henny mentioned earlier, location, being present in different locations and building up a kind of trajectory towards that. Anna has asked, can we establish links such as communication and cooperation between ISSP, and ISWAP? So where is this potential, and I thought quite obvious connection, because it doesn't look like it has materialized yet, despite both groups being relatively successful in their areas. Henny?
I think there really has been collaboration and communication in this regard, but I think it was more explicit at the time when both groups organizationally were part of the Islamic State West Africa province. Now, ISSP having achieved provincial status, they have more autonomy and likely manages their own communications to some extent, even though I would believe it's the Furqan office, which is led by ISWAP, that still kind of coordinates the communications with Islamic State Central. But there's also been reports, including from local sources in Mali, that ISWAP, back in 2019, 2020, dispatched groups of fighters up to northeastern Mali to also strengthen and support then ISWAP Greater Sahara faction.
Great, thanks
And I
very
mean,
much.
even when ISSP infiltrated northwestern Nigeria, there were Nigerian sources, well-informed ones, that say that former ISWAP operatives also were engaged in these efforts. So, I mean, I think they have maintained some of those channels ever since, and still do.
That's a really good
point. I think that is a broader pattern of different affiliates, coordinating and collaborating, not only within Islamic State, but also within the sphere of Al-Qaeda.
Okay, thanks. John, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay. So I wanted to turn attention to something that's come up in the Q&As a few times now, which is the economic incentives for some of this violence, rather than proselytizing or spreading the word, which is something that has covered really well in the report, especially within the Benin context, which is that what role do you think, for example, the pipeline attacks that they've not claimed but believe that they are doing, the pipeline attacks or other forms of economic, let's say, looting or let's say sector generation that they've been engaged in? What role do you think that that's currently playing across the groups, and how is it informing their diffusion strategy? And do you suspect that it might play a much larger role in deciding where and who attacks into the future?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a tricky question. In the case of the pipeline being targeted, I mean, first of all, these groups are trying to make things as difficult for their adversaries. I mean, in this case, the Nigerian state, the pipeline is a major source of revenue stream and quite significant for the Nigerian economy. But I would believe that these attacks could be used more as a sort of negotiation lever in the case that the Nigerian state would choose to engage ISSP, or call them Lakurawa if you want, in some form of negotiations. But I mean, more broadly, ISSP, they have been very extractive in their approach to, like I already mentioned, extortion, zakat collection, looting and pillaging of markets, villages, and so forth. That is like part of their modus operandi. And both groups have been very successful in self-sustenance in the way that they have developed different revenue streams, including from cattle theft, collection of zakat, extortion, but also artisanal mining, and tapping into supply chains and so forth. So they have quite diversified economies.
Thank you very much. I think that's going to be incredibly important in their trajectories going forward, and where we expect them to be focused going forward, if they of course want to have a pretty hefty and well supplied financial supply. John.
Yeah, thank you. I think learning from other terrorist groups like armed bandits, I think they could leverage on that. For instance, now, like armed bandits, they have been deriving their revenue from gold mining. So I think they could look into that. Lakurawa could look into that later in the future, because currently they are more focusing on the cattle rustling and zakat collection from the local population, and collection of security protection from the people and the local leaders. So I think in the nearest future, they might look into, displacing more communities in order to capture resource endowed villages in the border communities. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Orlem asks, what do we know about the local footprint of these groups in Benin and Togo, which I don't think has come up very much at the moment, and do they have a localized structure and agenda, or is it principally incursions? So Henny, you might remember in previous webinars we've had on this subject where you've presented the work, you've talked about how they've moved from incursions to more embedded structures. And I wonder if you're seeing this as, excuse me, a replication of their strategy that they used in Burkina Faso before, or is this tailored or unique to the circumstances and the places that they're currently engaging in both Benin and Togo, whether or not there are differences there?
Okay, so I think it's a both yes and no answer, in the sense that they have been able to emulate the blueprint that they have developed over the years and applied in certain places, like in Burkina Faso. But Togo and Benin also have their own local specificities. So to some extent, there is still a lot of incursions, even though they have managed to progress more inland in these countries. And that is to say, most of the Savannah region has experienced some form of attacks or incursions or movements by JNIM, which is the same in the case of Atakura and Alibori in Benin. At the same time, it is a sort of slow approach, because now when we look from the first spillover incident in Benin back in 2019, we are in 2025. So 6 years have almost passed since the first spillover incident. At the same time, now we see that they have sort of scaled up or started to accelerating things, because they have entrenched themselves, they have been engaging in networking, interactions with local populations and communities across, especially northern Benin. In the case of Togo, I think it began more as a punitive expedition, because there were accusations or allegations that local communities in a way were complicit in taking livestock from pastoralist communities and reselling them and so forth. And JNIM, when it first embarked on this campaign in Togo, it was through massacres of civilians, and likely in retaliation for the cattle that got dispossessed from the pastoralists. While in Benin, it has been more kind of holistic or a more broader approach, both geographically, but also in the ways they have engaged with local populations.
Thanks very much, Henny. That's very helpful. John, would you like to respond? Okay. So I actually have a question now again about how, again, there's been a tremendous increase. There's not just been a tremendous increase in the Sahel, but also these littoral states. So what are states doing right or wrong to have witnessed and not been a direct participant in, but been relatively ineffective in mitigating the increase we've seen across the years? So a question for you about not just the states in which these groups are highly active at the moment, but how to prepare the other countries, Ghana, etc., Senegal, to these incursions, given how they have previously proceeded in the countries that they're now active in.
Okay, if I take this one, it's a tricky question. First of all, many have viewed the littoral states as a sort of, this is where we can apply the lessons learned in the Sahel. But in a way, I think we somewhat see the same sort of evolution in these northernmost areas of these countries. They are different. They don't have the same ethnic makeup and so forth, but there are still a lot of similarities because there are cross-border dynamics that goes from Burkina Faso into Togo and also into Benin and so forth, with the same communities to some extent living on both sides of the border. So one major issue I think has been like the stigmatization of some of pastoralist communities that we to some extent also have seen being replicated in littoral states with mass arrests of Fulani, and also policies to kind of hamper transhumance activities and pastoralism and make herders sedentary and so forth. So I think some of these policies can have been quite counterproductive, and groups like JNIM especially, I believe, has tried to exploit these kind of responses from the state.
That's a really good point, Henny. And I'm going to turn to you, John, because you mentioned that you engage quite a bit with military and intelligence officials within the region. And I'm curious about their own frustrations with what has happened and what they would suggest as ways forward to prevent what seems to be a somewhat inevitable diffusion of these groups across the northern parts of littoral states, but potentially further.
One of the factors that they emphasize is the issue of fragmented intelligence agencies and lack of coordination. And if you look at, for instance, if you look at Nigerian security agencies, you will observe that they have a kind of multiple security agencies, within the state, So, but it is very difficult for them to, to cooperate when it comes to intelligence. For instance, the case of when Lakurawa was reported, when the arrival of Lakurawa was reported, I think around 2018, the local community reported to police, and when they got there, they observed that these people, they were just pastoralists doing their business as normal. So they said, no, there's no issue regarding this group. They didn't pose a threat to the local communities. But when it got to a particular point, when they started attacking communities, especially when they killed a traditional leader, that oppose the activities of Lakurawa, that's when the communities discover that this group, they are threats to the community. So intelligence, I think Nigeria Security Agency will have, perceive this particular threat before it's metamorphosed into this big problem. So I think intelligence has been a major issue, when it comes to security challenges in Nigeria. And also regarding the recent coup in Niger, in the Sahelian belt in general, this has also posed a threat to cross-border security coordination. So those are the factors that I think that are contributed to the escalation and transnational terrorism in Nigeria.
Thanks very much, John. We've had over 100 questions, so I'm trying to collapse them into general themes. And we've only a few minutes left, so I would really love if you both could speak to whether or not you think that certain types of external changes or relationships that have been fostered across the Sahel, of course, this relates to some Russian influences, plus the changes in the Western positioning, either towards conflict regions, such as has happened since the beginning of the year, or in fact has been generated through domestic politics and some of the attempts to remove France and other Western interests from decision-making in the region. It has and will continue to have a detrimental effect on the rates of violence, not just in the Sahel, but of course across the littoral states. Curious about your thoughts on that, and please sum up your general thoughts in these last few minutes. John, please go first, and then we'll turn to Henny. Thank you.
Okay. I think recently there was a report that highlight the participation of some Western countries in the jihadist movement in the Sahel. And also, I think it was a Nigerian military junta that accused Nigeria and France as being part of the jihadist movement to destabilize their country. I think all these allegations, it goes a long way when it comes to security cooperation in the region. And I see a kind of further security breakdown in the region. Especially Nigeria, that serves as most populous country in that region, if the country could not find a way, to cooperate with the military juntas, I see further escalation of the conflict and more displacements, especially in the ungoverned spaces area and border communities. So my suggestion is that regardless of the political system being operated in this axis, the government, especially Nigerian government, should find a way to cooperate with these states, including Niger, Mali, and some other states sharing border with Nigeria or that pose a threat to Nigerian security. They should find a way to collaborate with them in terms of how they can manage their security or transnational security threats in the area. That's my thought.
Thank you very much, and of course, thank you for your previous engagements. They were fantastic. Henny, do you want to sum up and then lead us out? Thank you.
Yes, but I tend to agree with Dr. Sunday. I would say that this rift within ECOWAS, the geopolitical changes in the region, with the severing of ties with Western partners, have really had an impact, and especially in this region that we have talked about today, because at the bilateral level, it is between Benin and Niger that things have been problematic. And as you have seen on the map shown today, clustered activity is really concentrated on the border between Benin and Niger, where the Niger River also constitutes a sort of natural border. And further north between Niger and Nigeria, where you have clustered activity by the ISSP. And I mean, if these countries don't find common ground to kind of confront these common threats, then I think that the situation will continue to deteriorate.
Yes, I think we're we're in for a rough 2025 in the region. I'm going to close it out now. We're just about at the end of time. I would encourage everybody to read the report. Thank you very much, Gina. She has a link to it there. I wanted to thank, of course, Dr. Ojo for being here. It was a real pleasure, and for the ACLED team for putting this together, and of course for Henny for his, as always, excellent work charting the, unfortunately, misfortunes of the Sahel region and increasingly littoral West Africa, and Clionadh for their partnership in generating this very interesting information for the last, I think, 4 to 5 years or so, where we've seen the plan of the infiltration really fully starting to emerge over this period. We will undoubtedly be back at some point this year with yet another update about things happening within the Sahel and how the changing fortunes outside the region is going to start affecting the choices, especially the armed groups are making, and also the governments in terms of how they would like to engage with each other, and the likely collaboration between stronger groups appearing across the region. And until then, please check out Henny's work more broadly, which focuses on this on a regular basis. And I thank you again for your time and attention today. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.